Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to snowy New York. I just here from the Rockies. I've been praying for snow every day. Get here tonight and maybe here for a few days. I hope not. Anyway, welcome to the Council on Foreign Relations and our 2013 Corporate Conference. I'm Jim Owens. I chair the Council's Committee on Corporate Affairs, and certainly I'd like to thank all of you for being here this evening. As you might know, this marks the 60th anniversary of the Council's corporate program which began in 1953 with just 25 members, some of who are here tonight. BNY Mellon, Citi, ExxonMobil, Freeport-McMoRan, GE, and prominently IBM. And they're all still members today. They've now been joined by nearly 170 other global brand name corporations in a thriving and fully integrated program that really has a big impact on the life of the Council. Corporate members enjoy a robust program of benefits, including access to more than 300 meetings a year in New York and Washington and other cities around the country, and the ability to participate virtually from all over the world. We're especially proud of our CEO Speaker Series, which in recent months has hosted Boeing's Jim McNerney, JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, ExxonMobil's Rex Tillerson, and Chevron's John Watson. And we are pleased tonight that we'll be adding IBM's Ginni Rometty to this CEO Distinguished Speaker list. The corporate program aims to provide a unique forum for senior executives as member companies connect to the foreign policy debate through the Council. The business community certainly has enormous stake in this foreign policy debate, and really relatively few places to discuss it, particularly with the kind of interface with our public officials that the Council provides. Our meeting session tomorrow with Roger Altman and Richard Haas will explore competitiveness in more detail, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the morning, but certainly the ability of our country to lead in foreign affairs and in defense depends on our ability to compete in global markets. So I think that'll be a fascinating session. We'll continue tomorrow with Henry Kissinger in conversation with Charlie Rose on geopolitical hotspots in the world. There'll be a panel on emerging demographic trends, and we'll close with the Council's newest distinguished fellow, Tim Geithner, in conversation with Bob Rubin. We hope you'll take advantage of as many of these sessions as your schedule will allow. Before we get into the evening, I'd like to take just a moment to thank Council board members who are with us for this event, including our co-chair Bob Rubin, co-chair and vice chair David Rubenstein, who's speechless tonight, first time ever, and Tom Hill and Jamie Missick. Thank you all for being here. I'd also like to thank member companies for their contributions to the institution. A majority of those companies are represented at tonight's conference. We'd especially like to thank our founder-level members, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Goldman Sachs, Hess Corporation, JP Morgan Chase, McKinsey, and NASDAQ OMX. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to thank all of you for your participation in this annual corporate program. Without your engaged dialogue, questions, debate, this program would be meaningless. With that, Ginni, I'm pleased to be turning the program over to you. IBM was one of our founding corporate members, as I said earlier, and I couldn't be more pleased tonight than to have new IBM Chairman and CEO, Ginni Rometty, here to open this conference. Ginni's been with IBM since 1981. She rose quickly through the ranks into a senior leadership position. She led the successful integration of PricewaterhouseCoopers consulting arm into IBM beginning in 2002, as she received the Carl Sloan Award in 2006 for that distinguished work. More recently, she has been critically involved with IBM's Growth Markets Initiative, focusing on expanding IBM's reach into emerging markets around the world. It's expected that that'll generate about 30% of the company's revenues this year. I've been very honored to be a member of IBM's board and to see Ginni's rise through the ranks and transition into her new role, and she's off to a terrific start. And Ginni, welcome to the council. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Jim, thank you very much. And really as well to Richard, congratulations on 60th anniversary here. And you mentioned, Jim, that we were one of the founding partners of the corporate program, but the history with the Council on Foreign Relations goes back to 1920s. So we've got a long history together here. So thank you for that. And I'm going to start just with 10-15 minutes of some comments here. And I'd like to begin them by reading to you and ask you to consider 3 vignettes of recent events. The first one, a police department reduces the incident of rape by moving payphones inside of a convenience store. Second one, a Mexican cement maker launches its first global product in record time, not by building a factory, but by building a social network. And the third, a US presidential campaign doesn't rely on opinion polling and yet predicts the final vote in a key swing state within 0.2%. Now, these may seem, you may think, what am I doing? These are random, unrelated, but in just my short time to get us started, I would like to convince you that these things are examples of the same phenomena, how organizations of any type, and you represent companies, government entities, agencies, non-profits, whatever, will learn to compete in a new competitive landscape. And it's how they're going to compete. Because 5 years ago, Richard might remember, we launched something called Smarter Planet, and in this room actually gave a talk about something that was seminal and emerging in the world. And now you hear the words, you hear cloud, mobile, social network. However, ultimately, this is going to be about the data that is generated by all of this. And I would like to assert, and I hope we're going to talk more about this, that data will be the basis of competitive advantage for any organization that you run. It will be the basis in what will be a smarter era, but it will be the basis for competitive advantage. And I'd like you to think of data as the next natural resource. The only limit is yourself, though. It's not limited. The next natural resource that can be to our era what we think of, go back in time and you think about steam, oil, electricity did to the industrial age. However, back then, just because you had access to those things did not make you a powerhouse. And the same will be true here. Just because in fact, everyone will have access, but what you do with it will make the difference. And so what will decide the winners and the losers? What will decide the winners and the losers? And I want to share with you 3 principles that we've learned both with ourselves, but actually by doing work with thousands of different companies around the world on this topic, both companies, governments, and cities. So let me say that you would have to embrace 3 principles of the organization that you lead if you are going to become a winner. The first one, it will change how you make decisions. It will change how you, in fact, create value. And the third is it'll change how you deliver value. So this sort of first principle, changing how you make decisions. I'm going to assert that many, many more decisions in your company or entity, they will be based on predictive analytics and not your gut instinct or experience. Now, I say this for 2 reasons. One is because they can be based on all of this data. Sort of a factoid worth knowing. Every 2 days, the world produces as much data as all the world had created through the year 2003. And then we'll do this because we must, because many decisions have often led to some bad outcomes. We did a survey of risk managers not very long ago and asked the question, what was the #1 method you used in determining risk? What would you guess was the answer? Gut. It was very senior management, intuition, and experience as a gut. Now, that would be another word for gut. The other reason, and this is not an unusual phenomenon, even in fields that are very scientifically oriented. There's something called an anchoring bias. Those that are scientists in the room, it means you know 2 or 3 facts, they're in your subconscious. As you hear information and filter it, it guides the decisions you make, and you discount things that don't fit in that lens. So It's why I told you the story about what turned out to be the Memphis police. And that was a case, like it could have been any police, anywhere in this world, in any city. And budget's tight, got to come up with a new approach. We did work with them, with, in fact, University of Memphis. And the project was called CRUSH. You might find that, CRUSH, police, the difference was what CRUSH stood for was crime reduction utilizing statistical history. And what they were able to do was take sophisticated maps of data on top of each other, and then what you would see are patterns that were otherwise invisible. And the end of that story is finding the correlation of where rapes were committed, payphones outside, move them inside. And this is just one example of many and many that has led to a 30% reduction in crime in that city, largely because of this. Now, you see this in industry after industry. I see it in how I run my own company, but as well, public sectors, many different cities around the world, you see it come to life. But my key point on this is it's not about a technology tool. This, at the end of the day, is going to be about mindset and culture, because people have to unlearn how to run a hospital, how to treat a patient, how to make a decision at work. And we don't teach these skills in universities today. We don't teach them, but we will. Which leads me to my second point that, again, I'd like to talk about more in our Q&A. You're going to create value different. And what did I mean by that? I'm going to assert that the social network will be the new production line in a company, in an entity. I don't mean in a consumer alone world. You might have forgotten this. Peter Drucker coined the word knowledge worker. It was actually 1959, so I was a little toddler at this time. Now, non-routine work, but what's changed? Obviously, I said tons of data. The tools are different today than they were then, billions of different interfaces. But today's knowledge workers have access to something round the clock. They have access to each other. That's what's different. And in a social enterprise, I will also assert that your value will be not what you know, it'll be what you share. And that is a very different paradigm. And that's why the second story. And that actually was about the Mexican cement maker, Cemex, a cement company. First ever global brand. I had to learn myself, actually, many different kinds of cement. It all, of course, depends on the weather, the geology, the place, the part of the world. And they're often locally developed. In this case, with a social network of 50 different product development groups around the world, 400 communities, they launched a global brand in 1/3 the time it would have taken to do a local brand. So just a small example, but remember, this is a cement company that we're talking about. And what they're now valuing is expertise and experts. And I see this in, by the way, what it ends up doing to any company, any organization, it will change who you hire, how you compensate them, how you develop them. And in fact, I see it in IBM. Every IBMer today has access to, you name it. We have wikis, blogs, communities, social networking, and the like. But in the near future, there'll be something else. And I'm going to have IBMers, they're not only going to rate each other, professionals, clients, and the like will rate them. You'll be rated by the information you create, how you share it, what's its value. You've seen this, 5 stars, maybe I'll even pay you that way. 5 stars, 1 compensation, 2 stars not. So it will be a different future. And then the last point I'd leave you with is this idea that how you'll deliver value will be different. And value will be for individuals, not for segments. All of us, whatever we do, we either try to reach a customer, it could be a patient, it could be a citizen. And in truth, the best any of us do is a microsegment, some small amount. You might say, okay, males 17 to 25, this income level, this place, a red state, a blue state, with this characteristic. And even if you get it small, those are averages. They are averages. And so what you will see with this rapid emergence of, I believe, big data, social, and mobility, you will in fact see the death of average, the word average. And instead you'll see an era of you, Y-O-U, you. And that example is well written up, President Obama's campaign. It's well written up. It was not about targeting broad populations. 66,000 simulations were done a night. And out of that, you decide where to put your resources. And that came out with the 0.2% in the famous state of Ohio by having created persuadability scores. Individually, could you be persuaded? And then orienting your resources that way. And this is not restricted to politics. If you have a call center, it's no longer about a script, it's about a dialogue. If you have if you're in advertising, it's not about a promotion, it's about a two-way discussion to get information. And in exchange, though, every one of us will expect something in return for that in this new era. Some benefit, be that a citizen or an employee or a customer. So, just to get us started, I wanted to just recap this idea that in the future, these guiding principles, as I said, as we've learned them, all around creating a competitive advantage in this new emerging era. When it comes to decisions, they'll be made on predictive analytics and data. When it comes to creating value, the social network will be a production line. And when it comes to delivering value, it will be the individual. It will not be a segment. But I'll end on this point. Actually, the challenge is not technology. As always, the challenge is culture. But remember, this is at the end all about competitive advantage, be this a company, a country, or a government entity. And in the end, I actually think something far more valuable will happen. Because the greatest contribution of this shift will force every entity, private, public, government, to actually become an authentic organization. So with that, I'd like to, can I invite you up, Richard? Is that okay? It's your party, but come up. So thank you, and I look forward to the dialogue. Thanks. David. I love my tea.
This is an example of product placement, so if anyone is tempted to follow suit, let me know. Thank you. Thank you for that really interesting talk, and thank you on IBM for 6 decades of involvement. I wanted to raise one question about the subject of data, if I could. And you used the phrase, it could lead to the death of the average. Do you, though, worry at all that there's a danger in data? That data almost limits? I was sitting there listening, and I was thinking of the Wayne Gretzky quote about you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck is going to be. Yeah. And can't reams of data get in the way? Doesn't data at some point almost force you inside the box and towards averages?
You know, yes and no. Not if it's done at an individual level. And the other thing I think data does more than anything is it removes biases that I talked about that you have. And we're actually seeing this with work we've done. Many of you may have seen it with some work we've done with it's a longer story, but a computer named Watson in medicine. And at the end of the day, because it is so unbiased and unfiltered in how it looks at information, it comes up with different proposals you wouldn't otherwise have come up with. Now, all that said, my view is this is not an either or. So it's going from one extreme. There's always a ditch on both sides of a road. And in this case, in many times, you've got to take the data as input. There'll be times when you take it for the answer, but often it will be to make you think of something different. So I do think you have to be careful. People say, well, then, is that thing just going to replace everyone? Not at all. If anything, it's giving you advice. In fact, I envision, actually, Richard, it's a day where often what you're going to find out is a set of alternatives, confidence levels, facts that either support them or things that don't. That's actually what the data is going to show you. And then you add creativity and innovation to that.
I should say, by the way, that those of you who are hoping that David Rubenstein was going to interview Ginni, I apologize for the disappointment. David was felled by an inability to speak. So those of you who want to have an argument with him or about what Carlisle is doing, tonight is your best opportunity. So I recommend you all accost him.
I get a rain check with him then.
Yeah, you get a rain check. When I think of the phrase IBM, I think of chess, computers playing chess. I think of mainframes, Big Blue. I expect much of that is decades, if not longer, out of date. What is IBM now?
Yeah, that's, you know, so when you're over 100 years, you have lots of lessons you learn, right? And I would say one of the biggest lessons we have learned in that 100 years is don't define yourself by a thing. That's a mistake. Don't define yourself by a product at any one point in time. So if you ask me to put it in a word, I feel what IBM is an innovation company. So it's a company that continuously transforms to become something else that's of higher value. So what you remember would have been right. I mean, decades ago, we were a hardware company. But you look today, and the hardware business represents 15 to 20% of our business today. So it's complete 80-20 flip from where it has been. But that's always just been about a search of finding what's the next area where you can make a market and contribute.
I want to talk about that because I'm curious then, to the extent now that IBM is not a hardware company, but it's a technology.
Includes hardware, important
hardware.
company, but much more.
It's technology, it's services, it's many things. There's got somewhere in there has to be embedded some assumptions about the dominant technologies, either what they are or what they're going to be. When we had Randall Stevenson here a few years ago, it reminded me of a scene out of the movie The Graduate. And he said, I've got one word for you all. And we all hung on it. It was not plastics. It was mobility. And everybody took note. So when you look at technology today, what is your sense of what it's shouting at you?
Yeah, I think it's actually what it's shouting is a confluence of four things happening faster than they've ever happened in the past. So it's a bit different than the past, where there'd been one thing, as you said. Now you've got these phenomena, and it's not so much what they are technology, it's what they enable, which I'll come back to. But you've got cloud, mobile, social, and big data coming off of all of those things. But they're all at one time, and they're all happening fast. And so what happens as a result of that, as an example? So as I say, this is going to force new ideas. You see it already. I know many of your businesses, the business people I know here. It's going to force a whole change in what I would call affectionately the front office of a company. So professions like marketing are going to be completely redone because this is enabled and how they're going to use technology. You'll enter an era where in the past people worked on their back office, now they're working on their front office in this complete, like I say, it's quite obvious marketing is one of those professions about the individual, a dialogue, a complete, by the way, this is why marketing is going to be such a steward of the culture of a company because of you're going to be transparent to people out there, to your customers, what you are. So those things at one time are really that is the next big thing. Now, if I could just, one more plug from a actual big T technology perspective, there is a third wave of technology happening at the same time. It's related to data, but if I describe it, I think it'll make perfect sense. I hope perfect sense. To date, there have been two eras of technology in all of the world in all of time. The first era were computers that counted things. I think that's quite obvious, tabulation of all different kinds. The second era were computers that were programmable. You tell them what to do. If, then, do this. And some of them do that at millions and millions a second. They do that. Or do multiples in one time. The third era will be, because of data, it has to be, this is a computer that learns. You can't. The information's too big, it's too fast, you can't program it. We can talk about security, all these different things. You have no choice. It will be a system that, you can use the word cognitive, it has to learn by itself. And that's the third wave. Each of these go 30 to 50 years. That's the wave that starts now. And it coincides with that big data. And that, to me, is a decades-long change that'll happen, those two together.
Two of the other words you mentioned there were cloud and social media.
Yeah.
So your sense is where you sit at IBM, these are not, if you will, passing phenomena, but these, if you will, are the new normal?
I think they're the new normal. And we've got 430,000 people. 50% or so have been with us less than 5 years. So you see another, and in some cases it's generational. You see a millennial generation out there and how they work and what they do differently. And every one of us are going to, the next workforce, you see it around you, right? I don't tell you something you don't know. And so these phenomena absolutely change how people think, how they work, how they want to work, how they're going to interact. So to me, these could be very powerful inside the organization. We were talking over some coffee right before, and I was saying, I use these technologies internally on how, we were saying, how do you deal with such a large workforce? And these have allowed me to accomplish what I think in an old way of doing communicating would take someone years to do. You're able to move that many people almost in a one-to-one relationship by doing that within your company.
Given the dynamism that you're describing and the fact that we could be moving, you've got movement both within eras and possibly from one era to the next, what about that worries you? What keeps you up at night then?
Again, so given our history and and you reflect back, what did you learn? In this industry, technology, most people characterize technology as a very hyper industry. Innovation commoditizes. Innovation commoditizes. So the biggest thing to fear in this industry is you miss a shift.
What do you mean by a shift?
A shift, a technology shift. And if you go back you mentioned it yourself about different eras. You actually started down that path. I kind of said them in a big, broad technology sense, things that were tabulating, programmable. Well, those manifested themselves over time in probably the first era of real computers people remember would have been mainframe. You mentioned mainframe. IBM was by far the leader in that era, but then there was client server that came after that. And we were speaking about this too. Well, we played a role, but we weren't the dominant player in that. And that's the time when IBM almost met its demise during that period. And so that's what happens when you miss a shift. Then came web, sort of the initial Web 1.0, of which we participated in some very big ways from an enterprise, a company perspective, not the consumer. And then now you'll meet this new wave, sort of when you add all four of these things happening at one time together. So you don't want to be late. You don't want to miss it.
When I think of technology now, I think of the Palo Alto gang, and I think, or out west, and you think of the Apples, the Googles, and others. Is IBM, are you still, when the best graduates come out of the schools, essentially, what is it you do to get them to come to your campus rather than theirs?
Yeah, you know, to me, in a word, when people come to IBM, they come to IBM because you can work on the world's most important problems with access everywhere in the world to everything, and IBM is really the only one left with a commercial research organization, the only commercial research organization in our industry left. Oh, well over 3,000, and I mean real research, not development, real research, all right? So hiring majority of the world's PhDs in math, as an example, to join on. So that idea that you can work on the most important things, whether it's landing a man on the moon, whether it's right now the work we're doing, as you well know, Richard, with Memorial Sloan Kettering, with MD Anderson, Cleveland Clinic on oncology and cancer, you don't get to solve those. Those are grand challenges. You remembered Gary Kasparov and chess. That's what you were referring to. These are grand challenges. And the chance that you get to impact one of those, you know, those are dreams of a lifetime to get to work on. So it is typically the challenge and the people are why they come. And, you know, there's also a second reason. Many of those, we are an enterprise company. And that's a choice, to work on enterprises, not consumers. So, and that's a different set of problems.
I'm going to ask a few more questions, and I'm going to open up to you all. One issue I wanted to put on the table is cyber.
Yeah.
We as an institution had some unfortunate experiences.
Yes, I know.
2 months ago. I expect some of the organizations here, indeed I expect every organization here, is spending unimaginable sums of time and money making themselves less vulnerable. We never used the word invulnerable, simply less vulnerable. Some have been more or less successful than others. What is your involvement in this space?
Look, we from many different sort of perspectives, because we have an involvement obviously as a big company and a technology company, from helping clients with it. We have a whole business around it, and then with influence in government and regulation on this topic. But as I say to clients, whatever you do on this topic, you don't do enough. That's it. Whatever you're doing, you don't do enough. And when you realize the level of sophistication in what it is we're talking about, because it goes from being concerned about the theft of intellectual property, to being concerned about economic, actually harm to be done, to obviously nation-state sponsored sort of cybersecurity, and then what you can do about it. Actually, this comes full circle. This becomes so complex. The best and really the way to deal with this, it is a big analytics problem. It is a big data analytics problem, predictive. You'll never be able to know in advance every problem and put a wall up for it. It's absolutely impossible. So the best you'll be able to do is use predictive analytics to look for things that look slightly out of miss, right? I always say, so you could see footprints in the sand beforehand. And so that is the idea around the analytics, and then the regulation, which it is one area that regulation, you can't regulate this environment. It changes too fast. The most important thing you could do is, as an example, what's in the House bill, which is have information sharing, but without liability, right? The best thing is to be able to share information quickly between companies and government without liability issues on it.
But isn't one of your biggest issues is going to be here that this is obviously global, and even if we come up with some sharing and some rules of the road domestically, this is obviously the most global of activities. And the rules of the road, I would say the gap between the technology and the international political, legal, diplomatic framework is
Yeah.
a chasm.
Yeah.
And
I would agree with
efforts
you.
so
I would
far to
agree.
narrow it
I would agree.
are not succeeding.
But the worst is the flip of that, is if every country tries to regulate this themselves, I mean, then you will really have a complete standstill between, and a greater vulnerability, right, at the end of the day.
I've got two more questions. One is in terms of immigration and education reform. Can IBM, you mentioned before you're getting some of the best PhDs. A lot of the technology companies, when the CEOs or others are here, one of their first concerns is they either can't get, or if they get, they can't retain the people they need. How important is comprehensive, first of all, comprehensive immigration reform for a company like IBM?
It's very important. You would say the same thing. I think all of us, I mean, this to me is the future for many, many companies are going to be folks that have math and science backgrounds and able to contribute in different ways. And so I think you would find that from many, many companies, their inability to hire with the right skills. Because even with unemployment, there are many job openings, right, if you had the right skill to be filled. So this issue about education is the root issue, right? So for jobs, part of the solving of a job is having the right skill to be able to fill it. And so as you know, something we were talking about this morning at a different session, I feel very strongly there are things each of us in private sector can do about this topic versus just talk about it and treat it as if it's a very large problem that's unsolvable. And there are a number in this room that we've done work together. You had seen President Obama mentioned in his State of the Union address, he mentions a school that we had done in Brooklyn here called PTech. It's called Pathways to Technology, but it's something I think every business could participate and do. And in fact, others have joined us now. It's not, it doesn't need to be us uniquely. And it took a high school and extended a 6-year program, so 2 years of what we would call an associate degree here in the United States. And we influence the curriculum, we assign mentors, and then these kids, when they graduate, it's right of first refusal on a job. Boy, their attendance has skyrocketed. We're into it a couple years now, and the kids on average already have 14 college credits. So they're well on their way. Many will either graduate now early, we're finding, or are going to go on to university. And Rahm Emanuel started now 5 schools in Chicago. They're going to do, the Governor Cuomo said 10 more here. So this would be, and in fact in Chicago, we did this joining with Verizon joined us, Microsoft. There was a group of other companies that all then pitched in. I believe we could solve a lot of this education in this same way in many places around the world, in the country, doing this, because you're training for the future skills in what companies need so they're employable. So we've got a lot of passion around this topic that we can all make a dent in this topic of both raising our folks here to have the right skill, makes this country more competitive, more productive, and in fact solves a problem as well as the skills you need.
And what is your sense for yourself of here you are, you're head of one of the major companies in the United States, you've got a workforce of nearly 500,000 people. What is your sense of your either opportunity, obligation, responsibility, choose your word, as a corporate spokesperson, as a, if you will, a corporate statesman? What is your sense of what you're hoping to do with that part of your job?
I think in general, or as relates to education?
In general, is education, when you think of IBM, is education at the top, if you will, the CSR kind of list?
It is, but you know, it's an important point. And actually to say CSR, I think the best thing for any company is when you can intersect your own business strategy with corporate social responsibility. And the reason I think many of us would all agree with that is it makes it sustainable. When they're dislocated, they're not sustainable. When they're intersected together, they are. And so I think it's our obligation, like I know many of the companies I see sitting here, to play a big role, because just like I feel I'm the steward of this company for my period of time, it existed before and it will exist long after, as long as we are very vigilant about transforming it. In that same way, you play a role in being sure that you contribute to society, right? So you've got to contribute to society in both from the cities, the education, the preparedness of what happens, and that's not just locally, that's on a global basis.
Why don't I stop? Let's get some questions. If people would wait for a microphone and just give us your name and with whom or for whom you work. We will get as many questions in as we possibly can. We have microphones somewhere running around the room. Yes, sir, I see right there. I apologize if I don't know everyone's name, but there's 170 or so member companies, and I ain't
Come
that
on,
good.
you know them all.
Okay, good. Well, I'm Jonathan Berman, and I'm with Dahlberg Global Advisors. Just before I ask Ginni a question, I want to thank Richard for your proactive approach to the cybersecurity issues here, both in terms of what you've done in terms of the program, but then also how you responded to your own challenge. I thought it was really impressive.
Well, thank you, but there's no interest like self-interest. And
Okay. And then for Ginni, I wanted to ask you, IBM recently opened a research center in Nairobi, one of only, I think, about a dozen around the world.
Yeah.
Not every company would think to go to Nairobi.
No.
Why don't you talk a little bit about why you made that choice and why that works for IBM?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And so IBM Research, and IBM spends on research and development about $6.5 billion a year. But in research, there are 12 centers now around the world. The last 3 we've opened in the last year or so. And so originally when research was built in IBM, you did what most research company, or well, most organizations who were going to set up research at the time did. You would have opened a center next to a very prestigious university, be that MIT, be it Stanford, a whole list of them. Therefore, you'd get really smart people out of the university to come into your research organization. Back to this issue about big data and the kind of problems in the world and urbanization, you no longer, if you really want to work on the most pressing problems in the world, you're going to have to open up a research center in the middle of the problems. You can't bring the problems, they're too big. You can't bring the problem to research. You have to go immerse research in the middle of the problem. And that is what took us to Nairobi. And have a government very anxious and interested in a population that wants to learn on top of it. And I think what we may be able to do, one of my hopes and aspirations for Nairobi, and I'll come back to Africa in a second, but is that you'll be able to, if I may use the words, you're going to have good enough solutions come out of this. Necessity is the motherhood of invention. And we worked on, it's a quick example, we worked on traffic congestion there. Sent in a bunch of researchers. Well, had this been Brisbane, Stockholm, London, Sao Paulo, any other city, it would have been about massive infrastructure would have to be put in place, all these cameras, all this information, systems to be built, law time, a tax referendum. Well, they had 9 cameras. So 9 low-grade cameras, that's it. But the researchers, back to data and analytics, said, you know what, let's just take what you got there. I think we could actually predict where traffic's going to go. Based on all different things, we could predict where every individual kind of car is going to go. And out of that came, sure enough, close enough. And so it's an example of you get an entirely different solution to come out of that. And I think that's what's going to happen. So that's how we picked Nairobi, and because a belief, very strong belief, that I hope the time is going to be in this next decade here, that the time is right, that Africa will. And when I say Africa, those of you know the continent well, it's 54 countries. So you can't paint it with one brush by any stretch. But we're in 24 countries today, and sub-Saharan Africa in particular, great opportunity. And as we'll see as these elections go and wrap one way or the other here, if we begin to see a dislocation between the political landscape and the business landscape, that they can sort of not kind of go with one another, but maybe in a good way be able to have some stability in one as one changes, as an example, that this is the time. So I believe strongly this is the time. And but it's a difficult place to build up resource, but having that there to solve some of these most important problems is why we opened up Nairobi.
When a lot of your colleagues in the community speak about their reasons for investing in places like Nairobi, they talk about opportunities abroad. The other reason, though, is what they see as barriers to investing here at home, whether tax policy, the questions about the political environment, and so forth. To what extent is IBM, like a lot of other companies, holding off building capacity in the United States because of concerns about the political economic environment here?
Yeah, no, we've invested where it was the right place to invest right now. But that doesn't mean, so I can't say that we have held off any investment and moved it differently because of that. But into the future, I would be the first one to stand up and say, you've got to have a competitive worldwide tax system for the United States, which includes not only rate, but it includes the ability to take that money and put it where you need to. And I, as often describe, look, 80% of the opportunities outside of the United States from a growth perspective, 80% of the growth, it's true across industries. That is just a fact, 75 to 80%. And therefore, you're going to have and get resource to where that opportunity is. At the same time, many of us have quite a few very high value and important jobs here in the United States, right? So you've got to have that ability to move your capital around. And when you do get to have to build something very capital intensive, you're going to have the ability to have to move the capital to where you want to build it. But to date, we've been governed by what is the right place to put it.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Anne Nicocelli with MetLife. Thank you so much for your comments. As you know, the U.S. and many countries around the world are negotiating free trade agreements rapidly. And within those free trade agreements, you have provisions on cross-border data transfer.
Yep.
I was wondering if you could characterize how you think countries are doing in general in setting up a framework for cross-border data transfer as well as data privacy.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit related as well to the security question as well. Still, how are they doing? How would you grade it? There is still much more work to be done on this, right? And so I think it's still at a stage where we've all got to still continue to advocate for these positions and advocate for that you can, in fact, have this data sharing. I mean, and it transcends into the security topic, but it also transcends into things like indigenous innovation, where people say, no, you've got to make it here, though. And you know, that to me, whenever you try to restrict something from naturally going where it would for economic reasons, for skill reasons, for a good legal environment that it can exist in, you know, you're going to create a problem for the long run. So I really believe those are the things that we've got to continue. I know every time I'm in a country and with the government, those are the things, one of the very top of the list topics to continue to advocate, because it's not where it needs to be yet.
Andrew, up against the wall.
You got good.
My name is Andrew Gunlock, First Eagle Investment Management. I totally share your vision in terms of big data, and I'm curious why you see customers or companies failing to make the transition or failing to lead the transition in their industry to big data, a big data world. Is it culture? Is it organization? You mentioned in the beginning the Obama campaign, which is, it's interesting because the Obama campaign led on big data and technology for two elections in a row. They won with myobama.com that Chris Hughes, I don't know if he's here tonight, built, and then on the data analysis for the second one. But if you take another example, Major League Baseball, Billy Beane's or Michael Lewis's book came out, and 10 years later, all that data is commoditized, and competitive advantage has gone back to the traditional competitive advantage, which is money in big markets. So I'm curious why you see companies making it and not.
Yeah. Back to some of the comments that I made. There's lots of reasons.
Do you think the Yankees are too old this year to win?
No comment. So I think that the biggest actual issue is cultural, and this is cultural, and it's hard work. You know, I know for myself, because look, you get a couple different dynamics that happen. When people think of the word big data, they sometimes think of that as a buzzword. And they say, of course I use data. And of course I do analytics. And I can guarantee you all of us do. Absolutely we do. Our businesses wouldn't be where they are. This is about degrees of difference in precision, in prediction. And you start to, and using information, it's not just regular, this will be one day videos, image, conversation. See what you're not, the kind of big data I'm thinking about, if you had a picture of a graph and you kind of had we've shown this kind of, you are right here today, by 2015, the amount of information, it's going to be like this. You are at the 15% mark of what in 3 years is going to be flooding on you. And the majority of that isn't text. It's going to be information that is unstructured, video, image, conversation, etc. And it's going to be uncertain, meaning, what did that actually mean? Or, as I said, one of my favorite examples was I can remember reading an article, I'm pretty sure it was the New York Times. It was talking about garbage trucks, and that were they or were they not sitting in the Hudson River? And should you dispatch emergency? What do you do? Were these GPS signals gone awry, or were they actually there? And this is uncertain data. This is going to happen. And you're going to make decisions real time on this. And so that is a different world than the world of the past. So when I say this isn't the old world, it's going to be a huge tsunami of information. And then you're going to have to change processes, systems. I mean, just think, because someone has, enabled by a device, they're able to order something right here, that means you're going to have to be sure all your systems through the back end respond immediately to that. I had a great example of a client who did work in retail, and they allowed all of their retail, there's a store, a department store. They had their customers responding to the millennial generation could create their own storefront, populate it with their material, their different products out of the mothership, as you might say, and then they would get a little commission. But if you know how millennial generation works, they'll believe their friends more than they will anything else. So this is a good thing. It is a great thing. However, all of a sudden, you're not doing any planning anymore. You don't have insight into what's going to be required, what the demand's going to, it's coming through another way. So this all ends up to be good, heavy lifting, hard work is the end of the story. So it's both culture, and then it's the ability to turn this into real business. You have to change real processes and real information. And so I think it's hard. That's kind of a short answer to it's hard. So it's both culture and hard. But that's why the basis for competitive advantage, those who do it, it does really differentiate you. And by the way, one more point on this is that I don't care what business you're in, as you look into the future, and everywhere I go in the world, every client I meet with, you'll have a discussion, and everyone, of course, talks about politics and their economy, but it's both growth and productivity. And even if you're in a growth market, you deal with productivity. And this data will be an answer to that productivity, because productivity does not have to mean cost cutting, and there'll be a point it can't be. It is all about how do you make things more productive, and this will, in large part, the use of this will help you with that piece.
Ginni, before I call on Rick Kirkland, you've used the word culture several times. How do you recognize it, and then how do you go about changing it?
To me, I learned along the way, culture is behavior. That's all it is. Culture is people's behaviors. And as someone once said to me, culture is what people do when no one looks, right? And so it is true behaviors. So what you have to do to change it, and I think in most companies, the biggest and most important thing you can do is you have a set of values in a company, and instead of stopping there, you have to operationalize them. So people know what are the behaviors expected of me for those, and I don't mean a rule book. I mean, it's what do you do when there's no rule and you have to decide something. That's what a behavior and a value drives. So that's how you can operationalize it in a big group, and it is just behaviors, right? So when I say just behavior, but it's behaviors driven by values.
And just to follow up, and does IBM, do you believe, have a culture that truly differentiates it from other companies, either in their technology space or more broadly?
I do. Without a doubt. It's one of the few companies in the world, and I'd be interested if whenever you think of your own firm, what do you call people that work there?
Lucky.
Well, okay, that's it, okay. That's a very good answer, Richard. Ours are, what have you ever heard an IBM person called? Anyone? They're called IBMers. To me, it speaks to that culture. That is a very unique culture. You are an IBMer, and I hope our values. Look, every day I want and aspire to that the folks all walk and live those values, which are, of course, dedication to every client's success, innovation that matters for our company and the world, and trust in all personal responsibility. So, so does that make it unique? I think it does make it unique.
Nice. Rick Kirkland.
Rick Kirkland from McKinsey. I want to hear more about Watson. Watson's no longer the world's most famous game-playing computer. You've put him to work. So what are you learning from his,
her work?
Exactly, her. What are you learning from her early experiences in the workplace? And maybe more important, given your remarks about the third era and computers learning, what is Watson learning?
Yeah, so this is
and where does that go?
This is one of those, when Richard says to me, when people would come here, this is one I hope will be one of the greatest contributions that IBM will make in the future. And that, so Watson, many people see this on television when it played Jeopardy? Only the front row? Watson was a machine that played Jeopardy. It is not a search machine on, a big giant search machine. That is not what it is. What made it unique, it is a machine that you do not program, it learns. It had at the time ingested millions of documents, and it understands natural language, free format. So you speak to it, and it will decide what you meant. And I think one of my favorite Jeopardy questions, well, not my favorite, but it was a Jeopardy question, when it asked it a question about a chick, and it was actually speaking about a young girl, not a little bird. It had to be able to decipher in the context what is that word mean?
I hope Watson was genuinely offended at that.
Oh, yeah, well, it did learn something. This was another longer story for over cocktails over what did it learn, and big discussion, should you not teach it those bad things and unteach it those things anyways. So one of the, what has it done in the last 2 years since then? So this was a grand challenge. Because the team had to sign up to go compete on Jeopardy well before the machine was done, right? So talk about being under the gun with a TV contract. Okay, better get it going. And so they did. It won. But that was just a beginning. So the team has been commercializing it, and as I always say, it's been in medical school. So we could have chosen something different, but the first and biggest thing we did was assign it to work on oncology, and particularly some of the non-blood oncology. And those of you that may, for unfortunate reasons, be familiar with cancer know that many times the most important thing is first diagnosis and first treatment, which has a very large impact in determination of the outcome. So it has been, I mentioned earlier, working with Memorial Sloan Kettering, the Cancer Center here, MD Anderson, Cleveland Clinic, being taught by tens of the world's most renowned doctors. It is now ingested 2 to 3 million different documents, 42 publications in their entirety, in their whole life, 600,000 medical evidence cases, and it is being trained to do 2 things. An advisor to a doctor to help with what is the correct treatment, diagnosis and treatment. So as a treatment advisor, and then work with WellPoint, it's being used to help with when your tests are ordered. When you go to a doctor and the doctor has to go to your insurance company for authorization of utilization, what are the right protocols for different kinds of sicknesses and diseases? And so it's already in pilot. Those 2 products have been in their first announcement. Its next thing it's working on. So on one hand, we took one of the toughest things in the world, and still lots to do, but a lot of progress on this. Now I go, oh, by the way, one other thing. I watch when doctors interact with it. What it is, and this is where you get to this cognitive learning, you almost look as if it's a conversation between 2 colleagues, because what it answers back to a doctor is, well, here are the 3 options, here's my confidence level, and here's all the reasons why in the documentation I believe that to be true or false. And if I knew these things, I might have a different opinion. And so it's an iterative back and forth. Okay, now we go to the other side of the world where we said, okay, now we don't have to always work on solving world hunger here. Can we do something a little easier? And we've been working with financial services and telcos on call centers. So talk about another whole different end of a spectrum. But as an example, big number speaking. In the call centers in the world, typical call center, the operator or advisor you speak to spends 60% of their time trying to find the information to answer your question, looking for documentation. And in the pilots we've done, they're able to cut this in half and more because of its ability to have ingested and seen so much and instantly recall and associate things. And again, in English. Now it's learning, it's got to learn other languages too, but as an example, medicine, the majority of the documentation in the world, regardless, is in English. So both it's in medical school, it will soon pass medical boards, it's in medical school, and it's as well on the other side working in, being in any job that needs an advisor. Because, I go back to medicine. The issue is the proliferation of information. There's no doctor that can read all of that and keep current. And just think back to the question on Nairobi or Africa or India or China, all the places in the world, as well as places in the United States. If you could get gold standard care without having to go, you will have an entirely different medical model, right? And so the numbers are something like 15 to 20% of people with cancer will ever really be treated by a cancer center in this country. They'll go to their local hospitals. And so this would be a way to dramatically influence those outcomes.
Interesting. Jacob Frankel?
Jacob.
Got right up here, second row here if we can get it. We could play past the microphone.
Thank you. Jacob Frankel, JP Morgan. You spoke about the opportunities, Africa, and social responsibility. Let's try to combine them. Demographers tell us that in the next 20 years, Africa will have more than 500 million added population, more than all the additions to China, India together, etc. By the same token, these opportunities may not be there if the health situation is not going to be taken care of. So it is really an issue which is not just social responsibility, it's almost business interest.
I agree.
How does large company like IBM or others, how do we translate that business interest in addition to the human interest to deal with that issue?
Jacob, that is, I think not only is that a great question, it's a great statement of what it is an obligation of many great companies to do. And so, you know, one method we picked to address that, and it's actually, I got to tell you, it's had a byproduct of being one of the best leadership development things we could have ever done to help IBMers become global citizens. We started something called the Corporate Services Corp, okay, modeled on the Peace Corps idea. And by the way, we've done almost 100 teams in Africa. In many of them, infant mortality, cleanliness of water, all of these very related to the topics you're talking about in these parts of the world. And they are multidisciplinary teams from all, I mean, they could be an accountant, a salesperson, a developer, a finance person, you name it, all coming together, a consultant, come together, and then they go, and they don't leave their day jobs, but they intersperse this with doing a lot of homework ahead of time, and then they go to a city. It could be a city, it could be a hospital, it could be a not-for-profit, it could be an organization, and they go spend months working on the problem. They did some great work in Nigeria, as an example, on infant mortality in a certain region and what to go do about it. Or food safety, that's another big one, about tracking and tracing of food and what happens to it. So we've done 100 of these projects across Europe now, and I think that's both our privilege and obligation, given who we are, to do that. And it does, look, back to this intersection of business and corporate social responsibility. So do we contribute? Absolutely. Do our people, though? It turns out they will tell you it's the #1 most rewarding thing in their careers they have ever participated in. And now we have other companies, we've said, you know, no reason we have to go just IBMers, come along. And so we've got groups coming, you know, and that's even better for folks. Now it's multi-companies going together in these teams, back and forth, and with social technologies and the like. They get a lot done away as when they're there. They work on policy issues as well as the solution issues. They continue on. Some of these have led to World Bank proposals and the like of what to go do afterwards and how to bring it to life. I think it's a real, like I say, privilege and obligation to work on these issues, because otherwise it won't be good for any of us at the end of the day.
We have a principle here and a tradition
On time.
that's grown up over the last 60 years of corporate meetings, is that we tend to begin and end on time. And there's also a reception to go to. I never like standing between several hundred people and a reception. But there's also an elephant in the room, which I feel at least I've got to address. So one last question, if you forgive me, which is, since you've been CEO, has your golf handicap gone up or down?
Oh, I am working all the time.
That's a good sign. As a rule, you always want to invest in companies where the handicap is going up.
This is I don't know that there's allowed to go higher. I don't know.
Anyhow, Ginni, thank you for tonight, and thank you for much more.
Very good. My pleasure. Good pleasure. Good fun.